Welcome to the brand new Zach Lowe Show. That's right, I'm back to have the same in-depth NBA conversations you're used to. We're going to talk about the games, the X's and O's, the drama. The playoffs are coming up. And now you get to see every episode in full on video on Spotify and on my own YouTube channel. Episodes drop every Monday and Thursday with a collection of guests you're going to love. So make sure you follow and subscribe to the brand new Zach Lowe Show on Spotify or wherever you watch or listen to your podcasts. Let's go!
Welcome to the Ringer NFL show. Sheil Kapadia here with Steven Ruiz and Diante Lee. We are continuing our offseason series looking at every division, what teams did, whether they got better, whether they got worse, some way too early predictions. We did the AFC East and the AFC North. Already, we had planned to do the AFC South, but we got a little news since our last episode. Brock Purdy signed to a big-time contract extension with the San Francisco 49ers. So you know what? The AFC South doesn't have a lot of juice. You know,
be honest, you just didn't want to talk about the AFC South.
That's probably true.
Does. It's the only division without a team without a positive point differential. Do we even need an episode?
Yeah, I was saying, we're pivoting to the NFC West today, Diante, but then I was also thinking, how many times can I make this switch so that the AFC South gets done while I'm on vacation? If I'm just going to be brutally honest with the audience, that thought had crossed my mind.
Laying the grenade in our lap as you sail off for a little while. That would be a vet move. I'll definitely give you credit. That would be a vet move in that respect.
Listen, reps matter. This is why the being old is not fun, but these are some of the benefits from it. You learn some of the tricks of the trade. So, all right, we're going to go through the Niners, the Rams, the Seahawks, and the Arizona Cardinals. Like I said, we'll grade their off seasons. We will talk about whether they got better or worse from last year, and we will give one way too early prediction. Let's start with the news. The San Francisco 49ers, the team in the news, they have the second best division odds, which I think might surprise some people. They're right below the Los Angeles Rams. They are 6th in conference odds at plus 1,100, and they are 11th in Super Bowl odds at plus 2,500. Their over-under for wins is 10.5, one of the highest totals of any team in the NFL. Has to be the highest total, I think, of any team that didn't even make the playoffs last year. And we can get into the reasons why that's the case, but first we need to grade their offseason, and I think we can get into all the other moves. But let's be honest. The world has been waiting to hear Steven Ruiz, Diante, on this Brock Purdy extension. I was tiptoeing around it in the intro, but that really is the reason for the change here. Brock Purdy gets a contract extension reported as 5 years, $265 million, which would be $53 million per year, which would put him around the 7th highest paid quarterback. However, Mike Florio of Pro Football Talk was reporting that it's actually lower than that they ripped up the final year of his rookie deal. That's included in this contract. And so it actually comes out to around $45 million per year, which would put him around 13th. So, I don't know that the exact ranking matters that much. I think we know the ballpark of contract where this is. And once we get the actual contract, we'll know the exact details, but puts him somewhere between the 7th highest paid quarterback to the 13th highest paid quarterback in the NFL. He's got a no trade clause. So the 49ers are making a commitment to him, and he will be their quarterback for the foreseeable future. Steven Ruiz, your thoughts on this deal? Higher, lower than expected? Did you think this could get contentious and this was going to go into August and maybe September? And of course, the $1 million question. If you were in the 49ers front office, would you have been comfortable paying Brock Purdy this kind of money?
I mean, I think the total, if you're just looking at the total of the deal, you have to be happy if you're a 49ers member or you're a 49ers fan, because it is a below market deal. We rarely, if ever, see starting quarterbacks go below market value. Like, it's usually the next guy up is the guy that's going to get paid the most. So I think that's a win. If the contract falls within that range, 7 to 13, In a couple of years, it will fall down even further to about like 16, 18. And I think like that's a fair range. If Brock Purdy doesn't develop from where he was last year for the next 5 years, that's a fair market deal. Just looking at the quarterback market, I think the trepidation comes up with whenever you're paying a quarterback, you're paying a bunch of money. And I know it looks like a bargain relative to the rest of the league, but you still got to pay. Let's say Brock Purdy regresses a little bit and becomes the 20th best quarterback in the NFL over the next 3 years. Sure, you're paying him a below market price, but you're still paying the 20th ranked quarterback like what, $45 million a year. That makes it hard to build a winning team. So I think it's definitely a win for the 49ers, but it comes down to what Brock Purdy, how he develops. And I think if he develops into the quarterback that people kind of made him out to be in 2023, where he was this processing god who always put the ball in the right place. Last year, the timing went away. The accuracy kind of went away. It's a shocker how that happened. But if he does fill in those gaps, then I think he is the type of quarterback who could earn that money down the line. I think this is a contract that could age well. But at the end of the day, it comes down to Kyle Shanahan. It comes down to Kyle Shanahan figuring out the run game, which went away last year with Christian McCaffrey being hurt. And then it comes with it also is determined by his ability to get this defense back to where it was. I think hiring Robert Saleh was the right move for them, to kind of going back to that old formula. But that style of defense requires a lot of talent, and they don't have the resources they had when they initially built that defense in terms of draft capital, in terms of cap space. Obviously, now that they're paying Purdy and they're paying these other guys on the team, these other star players they've acquired over the last couple of years. So I think from a team building perspective, it's going to get tougher, obviously. But it comes down to the same thing it came down to for the last 2 years. Can Brock, fill in the gaps in his game? And can Kyle Shanahan coach this team to a championship level? Last year, the answer was no in both cases. Next year, I think there is a very good chance that the answer is yes in both cases.
Yeah, you really can make the case that I don't want to say it's weird to say team friendly. I don't want to say team friendly because you're right. When you're paying in the mid 40s at a minimum, it's not really team friendly. But I will say it came in, if those numbers are to be believed, a little lower than I was anticipating, because not only are the raw numbers lower, but you have to look at percentage of the cap, and the cap has gone up since guys like Tua and Jared Goff and some of these other guys have signed their contracts. So it's actually even lower when you look at the percentage of the cap that this contract's taking up versus some of those other quarterbacks. And I just thought that the 49ers were going to have to pay more than that. So I think if you're a Niners fan, even if Brock Purdy isn't like your favorite quarterback, if you're not like this guy is 100% going to lead us to a Super Bowl, I think you have to be happy about it. I mean, this is a deal I absolutely would have done if I was the San Francisco 49ers. And I know what Ruiz is saying. The offense didn't look as good. Purdy didn't look as good last year. Diante, I think there's kind of a case that maybe last year convinced the 49ers to do that, because if that was the floor, if you think that maybe was the floor, Christian McCaffrey plays 4 games last year. Brandon Ayuk plays 7 games. The defense isn't very good. The statistics around the offense and the passing offense really weren't that bad. I mean, it was still kind of top 10. You can, any way you filter it, they almost still had a top 10 passing offense, even with those circumstances. So if you look at that and you're Kyle Shanahan or John Lynch or the 49ers organization, and you say, man, last year was kind of the year from hell, and we didn't like totally crumble offensively. We were still above average with the passing game. Then that makes us feel good about building this thing back up to a Super Bowl contender.
I think that it's fair to have that kind of takeaway. I think that it's really interesting, reading what Steven had on this, his analysis on the contract was more from the Kyle Shanahan perspective. I think mine was more from Brock Purdy's perspective. And I think that ultimately it does kind of fall in between the two of them, right? And I think that for me, the question I'm going to have is season from hell set to the side. From what we've seen of them in the playoffs, from what we've seen of them against top competition, when teams blitz you, when teams play more man coverage, when the stakes are highest, when there's the least margin for error, what kind of passer are you? And I think that you're right, Sheil. Like if you look at last season, a lot of that I think is just like a very accurate representation of Purdy as a player. Like early in the season, was really hot, taking chances, holding on to the ball longer, trying to push the ball downfield. And that was a new development in Kyle Shanahan's offense, right? And we spent a lot of time early in the season talking about like, hey, for a team that does not have its starting running back, that was the engine last year, and for a team that's trying to, remake its offensive line on the fly, the fact that they're still explosive through all of this is really impressive. We got a Juwan Jennings breakout year, ostensibly because of the way that Brock Purdy was playing. But what we saw as the rest of the season went along, the weather got colder, teams started adjusting, taking away those deep passes. The offensive line spent more time in those pure dropback situations than what we're used to seeing from a 49ers and Kyle Shanahan offense. And you saw a guy that couldn't really finish late in the season. A lot of games lost because you couldn't convert on conversion downs and high leverage situations. Turnovers went up. Sacks started going up in those types of situations. And I think that that's just a representation of who Purdy is. I do think that because of the situation he's in, the floor is high. The thing that makes him a conundrum is that he's not necessarily a ceiling raiser, right? And I think that ultimately he can just operate at whatever the level is of the supporting cast around him. And that's fine. That is worth $40 to $45 million per year if you're able to do that consistently. My questions just have not changed with him as a player. What really matters is the Robert Saleh hire going to matter enough to be able to get this defense where it needs to be, where they can compete in the playoffs? Are they going to have a healthy enough offensive line and running back room to be able to run the ball and keep the ball out of Purdy's hands when they need to do so? And then ultimately, when you get into those Super Bowl 58 situations and teams are going to blitz, teams are going to play tight coverage, they're going to take away a Brandon Ayuk, they're going to have their best guy on a Christian McCaffrey or George Kittle. What do you do as a quarterback in that situation? I need to see that. That's the data point that matters most for how I internalize my feelings about Brock Purdy. But as far as the contract itself and his place within not only the NFL quarterbacking kind of hierarchy right now, but just how we look at the 49ers as contenders, all of that I'm giving a thumbs up to. It just does not necessarily change the way that I look at where this team is situated right now.
I think like you kind of hinted at what makes it so hard to kind of analyze Purdy as a quarterback, like beyond the story, which I think that's first and foremost the thing that makes it hard is people see him as the ultimate underdog. And I think a lot of people see themselves in him. They're like, this is a guy that like looks like me, and he wasn't drafted, he wasn't highly touted, and he's making $250 million. Like this is a good story. And then you fill in the narrative gaps from there. I think we saw that in 2023, like what I said earlier, where everyone was raving about his processing and accuracy, which was the same thing people were saying about Jimmy G in like 2019, by the way. But that goes away. And then you saw this new version of Purdy come out in the first half of last year, where he is scrambling and it's working, where he is like making plays out of structure and it's working. But that didn't really jibe with the narrative from the year before. And now you have like two separate players. You have 2023 Purdy, who was the point guard distributor. Then you have 2024 Purdy, who was this guy that was going to hold on to the ball, who held on to the ball longer than anyone in the NFL, save for a couple of people. Which version of Purdy do we get in 2025? If you get like a hybrid where you're getting the best of both worlds, I think like this contract isn't just going to age well. It's going to be one of the best bargains in the sport going out. But if it doesn't, which I think is just as possible, and maybe he reverts to what we saw last year, especially down the second half. That's why I think it's kind of problematic to just step back, look at all of the results. Like at the beginning, it was working. In the second half, it stopped working. And he started turning the ball over, and those scrambles turned into sacks, and those out of structure throws turned into interceptions. And they lost games because of it, partly because of it. I think the defense was the bigger problem. So it's kind of hard. It's almost like a wait and see how this contract is going to age. But like, if you're just stepping back and looking at it in the moment when it happened, it's a below market deal for the 49ers. It's a quarterback. It's a quarterback in his mid-20s, a quarterback in theory who's ascending. There's no other way to grade this other than saying like it's a thumbs up for the 49ers.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, I like bigger samples better than smaller samples. So I like the whole season, but I hear what you're saying. You could, paint a narrative that it was trending down in the second half of last season. And if that continues, there's no doubt about it that the second half didn't look as good as the first half. I think his first half was actually underrated. When I was watching him, I'm like, man, he looks like a better player than he's been. He's able to do more amid chaos than maybe I thought he was able to do in the past there. So I think I probably like him better than you guys like him. I'm not saying he's on like the top tier and he's the reason why the 49ers offense is good. But I think if you're looking at it from a Niners perspective, which you have to do. It's not like, hey, an expansion draft, where would he go? That's not the question that the Niners have to answer. They have to answer the question that within our infrastructure, with our coach, what does this look like? I mean, the offense has, had seasons where they've had a very high ceiling, where they've been the best offense or among the best offenses in the NFL. So you have that in play. And like I said, I would be in the room being like, last year, a lot of things went wrong and the offense was still as a whole, not just the second half, not just the first half, but if we add it all together, the offense was still pretty good. It wasn't the biggest problem.
That was also the case with Jimmy G. This is a team that deals with injuries every year, and this has been their floor. Like, I wrote this in the article, like this wasn't the outlier year. If you look at their offense and their offensive performance, 2024 was not the outlier year. 2023 was the outlier year. This was in line with everything they've done since Kyle Shanahan got the offense rolling in 2019, whether it was Jimmy G back there. When they had to play Nick Mullins and I'm forgetting the other, CJ Beathard, and Deebo Samuel got hurt, and Brandon Ayuk wasn't playing, and George Kittle wasn't playing. He was throwing to Ross. Those two were throwing to Ross Dwelly and Richie James. They finished 17th in dropback EPA. They finished with a league average offense with those pieces that I just said. Like with Kyle Shanahan, the floor for this passing game is always going to be top 15 to top 10.
Although I think the difference, at least I thought, and maybe you might have the numbers that dispute this, but the numbers like from last year, they weren't using play action at a high rate. The yards after catch were not high. You know, he was pushing the ball downfield. If you look at obvious passing situations, stuff like, how did he look on 3rd and 4th down? He ranked top 8, top 10. If you look at him without play action, he ranked top 8, top 10. If you looked at him under pressure, he ranked top 8, top 10. So that to me is a different, now maybe it's wrong. Yeah, again, you might say, no, Jimmy G had those same numbers. I remember that feeling and looking more limiting with Jimmy G, where when I watched Jimmy G in the offense, it was very clear to me why the offense was succeeding and it was not the quarterback. And at least I felt like last year there were glimpses of, no, he is doing more under more trying circumstances. I mean, he was making a high percentage of tight window throws last year. I think he was among the top 5, top 8, something like that in the NFL. So I feel like the circumstances were harder last year than maybe they ever were for Jimmy G.
I think that's fair.
Yeah, that's fair.
I think that's fair. I guess for me, the thing I wanted to pose to you guys is I'm going to give you a list of youngish quarterback names who have not been like all pros or MVP types of candidates, and I want you to rank where Brock Purdy is on this continuum.
Oh boy! All right, here we go.
Jordan Love, Tua Tagovailoa, Jared Goff, who is young, I said young-ish, so I know over the 30-year-old mark. Jared Goff, Jalen Hurts, Kyler Murray. Where does Brock Purdy rank amongst these guys? All
right, what is again? I need more context to the right.
However you contextualize quarterbacks, right? Because I have a follow-up question to this, but if you were just creating your quarterback hierarchy and I said that this is a tier of quarterback that I've put together, how do you rank these guys from first to last?
For 2025 alone?
Going into 2025.
Okay. I would put Tua last on the list, and I think I would put Brock right ahead of him. Like, I think he's better than Tua. The one that's hard for me is Jared Goff, because all the arguments I could make against Brock Purdy in 2023, I could make against Jared Goff in 2024. Yeah. Like, if you drill down in Jared Goff's passing numbers, this guy had like the easiest job in the world last year. Like, he never had to move. He always got to throw to his first read. His first read was always wide open, and like they would get like 15 yards after the catch. He's the tough one, but like when you watch him play, like the guy has an arm, and when he's unbothered in the pocket, nobody delivers a better ball than him. So it's kind of tough with those two. But like, I think the other people you named, and maybe I'm forgetting a name, but I think those guys are clear. Like Kyler, I would clearly take over Brock. Jordan Love, that's more of a ceiling thing, and a talent thing. But I think he's the more talented player. But those, I would put him ahead of Tua.
See, and I threw in Jordan Love and Kyler Murray in there intentionally because they're confounding for me too, right? And we talked about that all last season. Kyler Murray, I've had a hard time with his entire career. Because he's dealt with injury issues. He's been talented. You've obviously seen him falter down the stretch. And with Jordan Love, like you said, I mean, that's all the talent that you could possibly ask for as a pocket passer. We haven't necessarily seen him be a creative passer yet. And some of that, I guess, for me is I get hung up with, is that a stylistic issue for me? Or do I just not think that, or do I think that what he lacks as a quarterback is ultimately going to hold him down or hamper his ceiling within that offense? But I think if you put those two just as pure talents off to the side, and you look at that group of Jared Goff, Jalen Hurts, Tua Tagovailoa, and Brock Purdy, I have him above Tua for sure, and he's right there with Hurts to me.
Yeah,
he's right there with Hurts and Goff to me. And to me, I look at everybody in that group, maybe outside of Tua, as guys that I think you can build a legitimate Super Bowl contender with. And then when you factor in earnings going into 2025 and beyond, then I feel very, very comfortable with Brock Purdy as a quarterback at that point. And I guess that's why, for me, I have not really had any second thoughts about whether or not this is worth it for San Francisco or whether or not this will work out. I think that, to your point and what you were writing, Stephen, Kyle Shanahan's legacy is now on this 5-year deal. That's really what I think is most important. But without getting to anything about how we feel about Brock Purdy, ultimately, whether or not we view Kyle Shanahan as the play calling coach and his winning legacy matching what he is as a play calling coach is going to ride on whether or not Brock Purdy can be something between what he was in 2023 and 2024 as a quarterback.
See, the reason I asked for context, and I'm still thinking about this, is because if I were the Niners, and I know your guys' answers will be different than mine for this, but if you said you can trade Purdy straight up for those guys for this 49ers team, I actually don't know. There's not a guy on that list that I feel like is a slam dunk that I'm just saying, yeah, let's do this right away. I think you guys would probably say Kyler. What's that?
I would not say Kyler.
I would not say Kyler.
I would say Jordan Love is the only guy on that list. I would say for certain that I would trade Brock Purdy for.
See, I would have some. I would, and I love Jordan Love, but with a smaller body of work, some of the inconsistencies, I don't know that I would be comfortable making that trade.
What does Brock do better than Love, and how would that function in the offense?
Well, that's true. Yeah, the question, the conversation with Purdy, always when you get to the tools, he's going to lose out on that probably.
That's not a tools question though. I'm saying what does he do better than him?
What does he do better?
That's a skill set question, which is different from tools.
He has completed passes and operated more efficient offenses than Jordan Love.
He doesn't throw the football better than him.
No, he doesn't.
And even if you combine accuracy and arm talent, which I think we should do, I think we separate those two things way too often. Because first of all, accuracy, anything over 10, 20 yards, that's not accuracy. That's timing.
That's a wide receiver stat.
And it's wide receiver tracking the ball. Like, you just have to watch if you watch the plays, you're like, this is not accuracy at all. It's my analogy is always, it's like shooting a basketball and like there's a person moving the hoop towards that doesn't make you a good shooter because the ball goes in. It makes the guy that moved the hoop to where the ball went, he tracked the ball well. So, and I don't think he throws the ball better than him. He doesn't deliver the ball more consistently down the field than Jordan Love does, in my opinion. But Jordan Love does have those wild misses, which make his accuracy look a little worse. When you can float the ball, when you can throw your changeup all the time and throw it 80 miles per hour, you don't have to throw it 95 miles per hour, you're going to look more accurate. That's just a fact of life.
Yeah, that's true. Listen, it will be an interesting, 6 years with Brock Purdy. No trade clause. We didn't even get to the other stuff. So let's take a break. We'll come back and now we'll zoom out a little bit. I think we're all on the same page with, yes, would have done this deal if you're the 49ers for Brock Purdy. It's a win for the team. I'm probably higher, I think, on his prospects to deliver on this deal, maybe a little bit more than you two. So let's take a break. We come back. Let's talk about the other stuff that the Niners did and then move on to these other teams. All right, we are back on the Ringer NFL show. All right, so let's zoom out now and grade the Niners offseason as a whole. So you got the Purdy extension, which we just talked about for 20 minutes. You got the George Kittle extension, 4 years, over $76 million. You have a Fred Warner extension, 3 years, $63 million. So those two guys, Warner and Kittle, are now the highest paid players at their respective positions. On the other hand, you had a little transition. You move on from Deebo Samuel. You move on from a bunch of guys on the defensive side of the ball, and you bring in Robert Saleh, hoping that he can just get more with less with the group that you have. So Diante, what do you think? Adding all those things together, how do you grade this 49ers offseason?
I feel like I have hovered in the same range for so many teams.
Yeah.
I'm giving them a B, and I would say like the B I'm giving them, this is maybe the only franchise that we've talked, at least the only franchise we've talked about this thus far, where a half measure was satisfactory for me. I felt like this offseason for them is very much about half measures. They couldn't really tear the whole thing down without it being very painful from a team building perspective. And I don't think that would have been the right call coming out of all the injuries that they suffered last year. I think they were prepared for this day, and they had been hinting at it since last offseason that, hey, we know the Brock Purdy extension's coming. Nobody ever had any second thoughts about whether or not they'd get it done. And that meant that some defensive veterans were going to have to walk out the door. I think the guys who left are probably the guys you kind of have to bet on their best days, having been in San Francisco and not at wherever their next spot is going to be. In Dre Greenlaw, Talanoa, Hufanga, Javon Hargraves, and all those guys. And I think that that's a safe bet. I do think that each of those guys will be productive in 2025 at their new stop if they're healthy. But I think it was the right move for San Francisco in that respect. And then with the extensions they gave for the big money guys that are still on the roster, all that is just trying to make your books as functional as possible,
right,
while, Brock Purdy's cap hit is still relatively manageable over the next 2 to 3 year window. That's fine to me too. So I think that they operated the way that you should as a team that is talented, that can be a playoff team. And they just need to, I think, kind of hold on to the rope for another year or two, and then really reassess what they want to do with this roster as Brock Purdy's contract becomes more and more cost prohibitive.
What did you think, Ruiz?
I gave him a C, but I had a lot of the same reasoning. It was more like the moves they did make. I think they were the right moves. Like we already said, the Brock Purdy, that's the biggest deal. And I think that was a no-brainer for them given the cost. I think re-signing Kittle made a lot of sense. Re-signing Fred Warner made a lot of sense. And it, like Diante said, it kind of frees up the cap for the next couple of years. But they didn't really address the offensive line, which I think was a big issue in the run game and in pass protection at times. And that's really my big concern. And I think the secondary, you look at this defensive depth chart, it's just thin across the board. Yeah. And the one thing I would kind of push back against what Diante said about the bets, which I do think they made bets about those guys, their best days being behind them. But the guys that you're betting on their best days not being behind them, the guys that stayed on the roster, like Trent Williams and Christian McCaffrey, I think it's more likely those guys' best days are behind them than Hufanga, or even like Greenlaw is coming back, obviously, from a couple significant injuries.
Even Kittle's 32 years old.
Yeah,
the Kittle one is probably the one that's that can really blow up on you.
But what are you going to do? You're not a
I'm with you.
And that's where I'm at with it as well, Steven. That's exactly where I'm at with it too. Is what else were you going to do with all these deals?
It's a long shot, but if these bets hit, you're right back to 2023, and we're talking about you as a Super Bowl contender. If they don't hit, then you're right back to 2024 and where you would have been if you did a hard reset this offseason anyway.
Yeah, I'm with you guys. I went B-, so I'm in the middle of the both of you. I think the extensions, I'm with you. I can be here and be like, you don't give a 32-year-old tight end that kind of money. If I'm in the 49ers front office in the year he just had and I'm trying to win a Super Bowl, and like Diante said, you got to get some cap stuff in order. All right, let's go ahead and give him that money.
He's the best player on offense last year.
Yeah, he was awesome last year.
Maybe the team.
Exactly.
Yeah, he was awesome last year. Fred Warner, you know what you're getting there. I like the Purdy deal. So I like those. And I even liked the first couple picks in the draft. So initially I was a little bit higher, and then I went to the Our Lads depth chart, and it goes to what Ruiz said. It's like, I understand moving on from a lot of these players. You're really you're putting a lot in Robert Saleh. And I think he's been a very good defensive coach, but now he has to prove it with kind of a different group here, that you have a lot of unknowns here, even defensive tackle. The secondary, there are guys who are going to have to play for them that you're going to have to get something out of right away. So I bumped it back a little bit because I felt like, all right, you didn't necessarily replace those guys. Not that they had a ton of resources, but you just lost a lot of guys who have been a part of this football team for the last 1, 2, 3, 4 years who are not part of the team. And now you're just relying on younger guys. And hey, we went through their drafts in our GM show before the draft, and they hit on some late guys, but the early picks were ugly. So I'm not giving them the benefit of the doubt that these guys are going to come in and be able to play right away.
I do think the most interesting transaction is one we haven't named. And it's not interesting from this is going to change the landscape of the NFC West or anything, but it's just interesting in where this offense is going to go next year. And them giving Luke Farrell $20 million, a $20 million contract, like a tight end, a backup tight end from Jacksonville. It's kind of interesting to me. But when you watch him and you see the tools, you're like, all right, maybe Kyle sees something in him. But when Kyle has seen stuff in guys that they've acquired, especially in the draft, especially with running backs, it hasn't always worked out. So I don't know if he's the best personnel guy, but I do think Luke Farrell, in combination with extending George Kittle, I wonder where the offense is. But they also brought back Kyle's Juszczyk. So all those guys can't play at once. You can't have two. I guess you can, but you're only putting one wide receiver on the field if you have two tight ends and two running backs on the field.
Let's earmark Luke Farrell for the first team all hipster team in August. I feel like I'm going to be hearing a lot about Luke Farrell in August.
1,000%.
So there you go. I mean, they didn't have a lot of resources, and so when they pay a guy on offense, I'm with you. It does. It should get our attention. So I'm glad you mentioned him. All right, better or worse than last year? So they were 6-11 last year. I think I jumped on the band. I was still holding out hope in early December. No, they still got a shot. Don't count them out. And then they lost their last 4 games. It didn't happen. Ruiz, do you think they're better, worse, the same as last year?
I think they have to be better. They led the league in adjusted games loss. All right, I never know what to say there. They were last or they were first. They had the most injuries.
I just say the most injured team.
Yeah. They were the most injured team. That's not going to happen. It was by a comfortable margin too. That's not going to happen again. They have to be better than what they were last year. And I think the 6-11 record kind of belies like what they actually were. I think they were a better team than that. I know down the stretch they kind of punted down the stretch. I think they even they pulled Brock Purdy because I think he had a shoulder injury. So I don't think that record is representative of what they were. So even if they stay the same, I think the record will be better.
What do you think, Diante?
I think that if I'm judging this solely off of roster quality, I would probably say they're about the same. But when you factor in injury regression, right, expected injury regression from last year going into this year, I think that, like you said, they'd have to be better. I guess my hang up is something that Steven pointed out when he was just talking about the grade for the offseason. I'm trying to sort out exactly what this personnel is going to look like on offense. Because they do have Luke Farrell, you do have Kyle Juszczyk, and you've also got a lot of young receivers outside of Brandon Ayuk and Demarcus Robinson who have flashed, but have not necessarily shown themselves to be consistent producers. Even Juwan Jennings, who I thought was excellent over the first 2 months of the season, especially in contested catch situations. That was not the Juwan Jennings that we were watching the 3-4 years prior in his career. Ricky Pearsall had some flashes. I need to see that for a second season. They're going to need something, I think, out of like a Jacob Cowing or Demarcus Robinson is going to have to show up, especially in Brandon Ayuk's stead if there's any hang up with his ACL recovery. I need to see what this drop back passing game is going to be like, is basically what I'm getting at before I feel really resolute in them being a better team. I just do think that based on their depth chart on a week-to-week basis, it's not going to look as despondent of a franchise as they did, especially down at the last 6 or 7 weeks of the season last year.
I think that's a key point because last year, like when you drill down into Brock Purdy's production, like the pass game production, and kind of separate things. Like you look at just play action on first down, you look at drop back passing on third down, like the screen, like everything is in line efficiency wise compared to 2023. It's just that they were not able to do that stuff as much because they were in second and third and long more often. And it wasn't like Kyle Shanahan was like, Sheil, you mentioned they were running less play action. It wasn't like Kyle Shanahan was like, I don't like play action anymore.
Right.
When it's third down, you can't run play action. When it's third down more often, they had like the most first downs in 2023, and that went down like by a huge margin in 2024. So if they are able to get that first down offense rolling again, to get the run game rolling again, I think the wide receiver question becomes a little less significant. But if it is like a replica of last year, then your 11 personnel, your 3 wide receiver sets better be better than they were last year.
Hey, is Nick Bosa going to get back to what he was in 2021 and 2022?
That's another key question. I feel like that has to happen, or this defense, like that's my hope, my optimism for this defense is that Robert Saleh comes back, you kind of get back to what you were doing, and the defensive line is eating like it was in 2022, 2021. But the pieces aren't there. And I kind of like just assume that it's going to happen in my head. But you're right, Diante, when you look at the roster, who is there behind Nick Bosa to rush the passer that's like solidified that we could bank on being a productive guy?
Yeah, you would need a Rams-like, hey, rookies come in and look really good. You know, can Michael
Williams is going to have to be like a double-digit sack guy.
Can he be Jared Verse? I mean, that's how he's built to be, you know, right? He's built to be more like, hey, young, talented guy, might take a little time, but could be one of the best players in this draft eventually. But you never know. That's the thing with rookies. I could say that now, and then it could be November 1st, and we could be like, man, Michael Williams is a revelation. He's been healthy and working with that defensive line coach, and he looks really good. That's their path defensively. You know, I think Saleh makes you better, but no coach can do it without players. And so I do think they need those rookies on the defensive line. They wanted to get back to their roots. Can Michael Williams, can Alfred Collins, can those guys be good right away or give you something right away? That's their path to being better on defense. Now, the luck factors, every luck factor I look at points me to the 49ers are going to be much better this year. You know, I think there was some confusion when the over-under win totals came out. Like, how could the Niners be at 10.5? You guys mentioned the injuries, most injured team in the NFL last year. They were 26th in turnover EPA. They were 2-6 in one-score games. And this is the biggest one. They have by far the easiest schedule in the entire NFL. And I know that, the schedule you're prognosticating there, it might not end up that way. But when you look at it and you just compare it to whatever Vegas projected win totals or Super Bowl odds, this is the easiest schedule in the NFL. So I feel like you're adding up a couple things. Hey, good offense, easy schedule, upgrade at defensive coordinator, and you have a chance to rebound. So I've got them. I'm with you guys. On paper, I looked at the roster and I'm like, I don't know, are they better than last year? I'm not sure, but I think you add in the other factors on the standings, in ESPN.com NFL standings. I do feel like their final place, barring some horrible injuries, will be much better than it was last year. All right. Way too early prediction, Ruiz. What do you got?
I'm going to say this is going to be their first non-top 10 offense since 2020.
Oh, interesting.
That was the year for hell.
Mine.
That was the year for, I think they were like the second, out of the last 20 years, they were the second most injured team of all time. They finished 17th in dropback EPA, but their run game wasn't there. That's what I'm concerned about, is the run game. I'm worried about Christian McCaffrey. We could
Who
say
knows
that
what we're getting from him. Yeah.
Yeah, we could say they're getting regression from the injuries, but like then we talk about Trent Williams and we talk about Christian McCaffrey, we talk about George Kittle, and like, are we sure that they're going to get regression? This is a team that I think is not built to have a lot of injuries, but like when you look at it on paper, you're like, yeah, that's probably a team that's going to get hurt. So that's my concern with this, is the offensive line not being addressed. I think it's going to be an issue in the run game. If Christian McCaffrey isn't back to what he was in 2023, the run game, drop him down a couple more pegs. And if that happens, I think we see a repeat of last year, but the wide receiver personnel isn't as good. The one thing we haven't mentioned is we don't know when Brandon Ayuk is coming back. Like Adam Schefter said, it could be mid-season. Kyle Shanahan is holding out hope it's week 1, but I think the more realistic outcome is he's not back till October. And we saw what that did to him when he missed training camp last year, how long it took for him and Brock Purdy to get on the same page. I don't know if they ever really did last year. So there's a chance that this passing game is worse just based on talent.
Well, now you have me thinking, is there any scenario, like let's say they win 6 games again and the passing game doesn't look good? Like is this Purdy contract a marriage with Kyle Shanahan for the duration? Is there a scenario where Purdy is under contract for the majority of this deal without Kyle Shanahan as his head coach?
That's kind of what I laid out in the article I wrote, was like, there's more pressure on Kyle now, not Purdy. Like people think that when you get paid, there's more pressure on you, but I think the pressure is on Kyle because we've seen what the floor for this passing game is. And the floor, like you said last year, when you step back, you look at it, you're like, oh, Purdy was actually pretty good. The 49ers front office was like, well, that was enough for us to give him $250 million. Purdy's not going to get the blame if this offense looks like it looked like last year. It's going to be Kyle Shanahan. It's going to be on the run game. It's going to be on the offensive line. We're going to hear the same questions about Purdy's ability to change the protections. It's going to be a repeat of last year. And based on last year, it was Kyle getting the blame at the end of the year, more so than Purdy.
All right. Diante, what do you got? That was a juicy prediction from Ruiz. Did you say you had the same thing or something similar?
I had the same one, so I'll make it a little bolder. I'll say the defense goes top 10 and the offense does not, and they still miss the playoffs. Wow. And I think that if that happens, that really opens up the Kyle Shanahan, fraud watch conversation.
I'm getting like tense here. I'm getting uncomfortable with it. I don't even know Kyle Shanahan, but I'm like, man.
All right, let me ask you a question.
I think Steven made the right point. Oh, go ahead.
Let me ask you a question. If they do move on from Kyle Shanahan, which direction do you think they would go? And you don't have to name a coach, but like what style of coach do you go in after Shanahan?
You always go for the opposite of your ex, right? You're going to go with the, player's coachiest defensive guy that you can possibly find.
Gus Bradley?
Oh my gosh. Well, I think the other part of that is
you probably start calling. You call Pete Carroll if something goes wrong in Las Vegas and say, "Hey, man, you want to come back to California?"
I mean, we're getting way ahead of ourselves, but if this goes in the direction you two are predicting, what can the Niners get for Kyle Shanahan in a trade? I'd
give up 2 firsts.
This is what I'm saying. All right, your guys.
I give over second rounder. Okay. We can talk.
I would probably, I guess we would have to think about the organization. But yes, I would not laugh at you if you came in, if I were an owner and you came into my office and said, let's give up a first for Kyle Shanahan.
The Giants Could you imagine what would you
Wow.
give up if
I
you
would
were
give
the
up
Mara
3.
family?
I would give
Shanahan and
give
Arch
one of the
Manning.
Maras.
Wow. I mean, I remember I wrote my column after they lost to the Chiefs, and I'm looking at Andy Reid, and then I'm looking at Shanahan and going, are the Niners
It's
to
very similar
Shanahan
to
what the
early
Eagles were to
aughts
Reid? Is there a
Eagles,
second
yes.
act here where he's not just getting close? He's got maybe a quarterback that he really, really likes or is really, really special, and he ends up winning multiple Super Bowls at that next stop. So, man, you guys took it an interesting direction. All right, Niners fans listening, don't worry. You can breathe. I'm going in the opposite direction. I got them playing on championship weekend in the NFC. I think with this schedule, they're going to bounce back in a big way. I'm not ready to say Super Bowl. We'll talk in August. I might be willing to go there. I'm considering it, but I put them on the list of contenders in the NFC. There are things that make me very nervous. The O-line depth, Ayuk coming off the injury, needing young guys to be good right away. The secondary, that's a pretty long list right there of stuff that makes me a little bit nervous, that might limit their ceiling in my eyes. But I still think this is going to be a very good team with a good offense, with an easy schedule, with an upgraded defensive coordinator that bounces back. But I'll be honest, for content, I like your guys' version of how this goes a lot better than my version here. Wow, that was exciting. All right. 40 minutes on the Niners. How about that? All right, we got other teams to get to here. The Los Angeles Rams. They are the favorites in the NFC West. They went 10-7 last year. They had the best odds in the division at plus 170. The third best odds to come out of the NFC per FanDuel, behind only the Eagles and the Lions, and they are sixth in Super Bowl odds. I feel like we've talked quite a bit about the Rams offseason, so I don't feel bad about maybe running through this quickly. But Ruiz, how do you grade the Los Angeles Rams offseason?
I give it a B. I still have questions about like the offensive line, the run game, their ability to protect when defenses know they're going to pass the football. I think that's when they really struggled last year. But being able to retain Matthew Stafford, I think, is what elevated it to a B to me, because there was a very realistic scenario where it's like Jimmy G or somebody else starting for this team, which is a disaster scenario. But I think if you have Stafford there, the ceiling is much, much higher. I don't know if it's a Super Bowl ceiling for me, but I get those odds that you just laid out. Like, I understand why people are optimistic about this team. I just have my questions that I think they're holding me back from going all in on them.
Yeah, I said Diante on the Philly special. There was only one possession during the Eagles Super Bowl run that if it went differently, it could have stopped them from winning a Super Bowl. And that was against the Rams, that last
1000%.
possession where Jalen Carter puts a move, I forget, on the center or the right guard. They're back-to-back plays where if he doesn't get home and that's a touchdown, it's possible that the Rams win that game. That's the only possession in the whole Eagles Super Bowl run where you say, if this possession or this series or these three plays went differently, the Eagles aren't Super Bowl champs. And so I guess it's not crazy to think that they could get back there and be in the mix this season.
1000%. And it's funny. I think that a lot of my grades are almost in alignment with what we were talking about with the GMs. When we were talking about GMs, going into the draft. I'm giving this grade on the assumption that they ultimately trade a couple of day three picks to get Jalen Ramsey. I'm giving them an A-. If they don't complete that trade, I'll drop them down to a B+. But I'm giving them an A- because they did exactly what they needed to do, which was construct this roster for 2026 and beyond, but leave just enough room to be able to maximize one last window with Matthew Stafford. You go get Davante Adams, and that is basically throwing the bone to Stafford of saying, hey, if you can be healthy again, if we can get you to January and you're healthy, we're going to give you a shot to really go try to win this thing. And if not, everybody shakes their hands. We go in our separate directions, more likely than not, and we start building for whatever the next iteration of the Rams franchise is going to be. I think that letting go of Cooper Kupp was the right move. I did not love Tutu Atwell getting double-digit millions to be the wide receiver 3. I don't love that, but I know that, or at least I expect that the Rams are going to be a lot more diverse offensively. And now when you look at their top 2 wide receivers in Puka Nacua and Davante Adams, it kind of behooves you to be a little bit more tight end, lean on your tight ends a little bit more, to do a little more out of the play action game where you can start pushing the ball downfield again and not be so much about choice routes and Matthew Stafford having to be an ultra processor in the pocket. Not that he's incapable, but just at this stage of his career, you probably just don't want to expose him as often in those pure drop back scenarios. And I'm assuming that the defense can hold based on what their best players are and where they won. And those are guys who were able to get after the quarterback. And I think that Byron Young, I think Braden Fisk, I think Kobe Turner, I think that all those guys are going to be just as good around Jared Verse as we saw going into last season. And I have really, really high expectations for the Rams coming into 2025.
I gave him an A. So I'm going even higher than you did. I just feel like if a week after that loss to the Eagles, you would have told me they're going to bring Stafford back, they're going to replace Cooper Kupp with Davante Adams. And then the big one to me, where I'm probably just leaning into my nerdy, analytical, be a good team builder part of my brain, is that they made that trade with the Falcons that gives them an extra first-round pick in 2026. And I've gone on and on about it on this podcast, but I just feel like that's hard to do, to have a season where you can potentially have a realistic chance to win the Super Bowl. And if it doesn't work out, you go into the next offseason with 2 first-round picks and a chance to pivot and not have that big gap kind of between one era and the next era. So I thought the way they navigated that, and you're right, Diante, part of this does go, who am I giving the benefit of the doubt to? And we talked about Les Snead, and Les Snead's done an excellent job. And so I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt here as well. So I feel like if you zoom out, this offseason went just about as well as you could have hoped for if you were a Rams fan, even if some of those parts of the roster that you guys mentioned aren't great and are question marks and guys have to prove themselves and maybe they have another move or two to make. I think the big moves worked out pretty much as good as you could have hoped for if you were a Rams fan. So I've got them at an A. All right. Better or worse than last year when they were 10-7, it was still, going to the end there. It was no given that they were going to be in the playoffs, but they go 10-7, advance to the divisional round of the playoffs. Ruiz, what do you think? Is it likely that this is a better team than last year, or is it likely that they go in the other direction?
I think it is a better team than last year. I think they found something after the bye week. They started out 1-4 and they win 9 out of 11 games before they rest their starters in the final week. I think the defensive line gets better. Like we didn't mention the Poona Ford signing, which I think helps out. What their biggest problem last year was not being able to get into those obvious passing situations, not being able to stop the run. You really saw it in the 2 games against the Eagles where Saquon Barkley basically, called game in both games. If they can shore up the defensive line, like the interior run defense, I think that they have a chance to be much better on defense, even compared to what they were last year when they kind of punched above their weight. And then I'm always going to have faith in Sean McVay. And I do think the Davante Adams signing helps the pass game. It's an upgrade over Kupp. The offensive line is just a problem for me. I just can't get around it. And I think it's been, when this offense has struggled since Sean McVay got there in 2017, it's been because of the offensive line. And I don't think it's going to be one of the better ones that they've had over that time.
Yeah, they've tried different things too. Last offseason, they make the big signings on the interior. Now, a year later, Jonah Jackson is gone. They trade him to the Lions, admit a mistake there, and go in a different direction. They also had last year alone, they had 8 different O-line combinations play at least 50 snaps, which I don't know if that's most in the NFL, but I do this for every team we go over, and it's definitely among the highest. I mean, the Bills, I think, had 3 all season long, where their top 5 played like 800 snaps. You didn't have that with the Rams. So they were really mixing and matching, pivoting from their offseason plan, had injuries, and you still end up with an offense that's, pretty good, a top 10 offense last year.
Can that 2026 first-round pick play guard for them next year?
Yeah, I know. Diante, what do you have? Better or worse than last year?
I think better, but very, very slightly. And it's just because they absolutely maximized on what they were able to get out of this team by the time they got to the postseason, being able to push Philadelphia to the very end. They run the Vikings off the field in spite of everything that was going on in Los Angeles with the Santa Monica fire, with the Palisades fires and all of that. So I'm optimistic. I am optimistic. I do need to see them find something a lot more stable in the run game. And maybe to your point, Sheil, just having continuity that they were never able to land upon helps them get what they needed. Because I just remember in December, I think there were a couple of episodes where I was watching the Rams and when we were talking, I was like, I don't see a playoff team right now.
Yeah.
Because Matthew Stafford just does not look very good in the pocket. Ultimately, they get to the postseason and he gets hot again. And you're always kind of looking, that threat always looms as an opponent of the Rams, is that Stafford just at 37, at 30 years old, is just going to be on a heater and there's going to be nothing you can do about it when he's rolling. they do just need to establish enough around him, I think, like I said earlier, to get him to January in one piece, not having to be a superhero in this passing game. And if you can get he and Adams healthy into the postseason, then I think that they're a legitimate contender to get to the conference championship game.
Yeah, because like you're saying like he's on a heater. It's like even more than that with Stafford. Like when he's like, especially last year when he was going, it was like in spite of the protection. It was in spite of the offensive line. And he's like basically doing like 360, no scope, just hidden. It's insane. And at his age, you don't want your quarterback to be doing that every week. You want him to be able to pull that out of his back pocket in January.
He threw a no look against the Eagles on like the first possession where, Eagles are running these intricate
I remember
zones.
that. I was like, oh man, we're in for one of those games.
How do you move the underneath defenders? Is it when you have a specific route? And no, he's just like, I'm going to look at you. You can't drop back there and I'm going to throw it there. I'm like, wow, that is ridiculous. That's one way to beat those underneath defenders or move them. So the highs were still high. I'm with you, Diante. I don't want to forget sort of how I felt in November and December when it's like, it looks like, the decline could be coming. He's on the ropes a little bit. I wonder if they do something. And remember, week 18, they sit the starters. They didn't care about seeding. It was so clear. They're like, Matthew Stafford needs a breather here. If we're going to try to win 4 games in a row, he needs a breather here. Maybe they do something unorthodox. Maybe they're like 14-point favorites or something in a December game. And McVay's just like, Jimmy, you're up. Matthew needs a breather. Or maybe they're up but big in the third quarter and they're like, all right, Stafford, you're on the bench here. We got to limit those reps. I don't know. I don't think any of those things are realistic, obviously, but it's on their mind. There's no doubt about it. He's entering his age 37 season. It's a long season. You need him at his best in January. Can you make that happen? So I've got him better. I don't think they're a team that really benefited from all those sort of luck versus unlucky factors I mentioned with the Niners. They were middle of the road for pretty much all of those. So I think their record was legit last year. And again, that last loss doesn't mean anything. So they could have been 11-6. And then Ruiz's point can't be overstated about just faith in McVay. I mean, he's kind of like a mini Tomlin at this point, 8 seasons, 7 with a winning record, different quarterbacks, different injuries. Sometimes in September, you're thinking this isn't looking good, and they still sort of always find a way. I think his problem solving is a great trait that kind of separates him maybe from some other great coaches who what they do is great, but when it doesn't go well, do they have a plan B? He usually is able to just figure it out, take a breather, look at his personnel and say, what's our best chance to win football games? And so, again, 8 seasons, a winning record 7 times. I think you put your faith in Sean McVay here. All right, way too early prediction. I'll start. Puka Nacua leads the NFL in receiving yards. How about that? Missed 6 games last year, but his efficiency stats, yards per route run, are insane. Like literally some of the best in the True Media database that goes back 25 years. So he was very effective when he was on the field, averaged 90 yards per game. Now, maybe Davante Adams steals some targets, but maybe Davante Adams steals some attention. And Puka Nacua is able to stay healthy and have just a monster season. So that will be my way too early prediction. Diante, what do you got?
I love that. I just think for me with Puka Nacua, for all my Ted Lasso fans, I just watch him and he's like receiver Danny Rojas. I'm like, you just don't have enough concern for your long-term health. Like you're willing to lay way too much on the line to get a catch or to get an extra yard or two, so hopefully he is available. I will say that my way too early prediction is another bold one, similar to San Francisco's. I think that the Rams are hosting the NFC Championship game.
Wow. Okay. So you're bullish on them.
I think that they will be in the Final Four in the NFL. And I think if I was to make a more tempered one, and it's still bold, it would be that Jared Verse is going to end up winning Defensive Player of the Year next year. I think that what I saw last year for him as a pass rusher, very similar to what we saw from Will Anderson early in his rookie season. It's like, oh, this is a guy who has not yet figured out how to build upon a full pass rushing skill set, but just off motor, off first step, off power. And I do think, it's kind of ethereal, but just a feel for knowing how to get to the quarterback. He has all those things in spades. I think another huge step forward is coming for him. And if they are able to acquire Jalen Ramsey, like I said, I think that they're going to have all the pieces necessary to take one last swing at trying to bring another Lombardi trophy to the Rams.
Yeah, I mentioned that playoff game against the Eagles. I remember watching the film of that, thinking that was the best performance by a defensive player against the Eagles all year. Jared Verse in that game against a very good
when he was killing Jordan Mailata.
Yeah, he was awesome. And I was like, because he talked some junk before the game, and then he's telling the fans bring on the booze, and then his film, I'm like, man, he was ridiculous in that game. So I love that. If you talk the talk, walk the walk as a rookie, especially, sky's the limit for Jared Verse. All right, Ruiz, what do you have? Way too early prediction on the Los Angeles Rams.
Mine's kind of a bummer now, especially after we were nerding out about Stafford. My prediction is it's his final year with the Rams. I just think the writing's on the wall.
I think
we also saw the contention. I don't know if there was real tension there. With
there
the
was some.
Stuff.
I feel like they definitely. I think they knew how to manage it.
If there weren't, that contract situation gets handled way earlier.
Yeah, that's a good point. And the other thing about it is they didn't end up giving him an extension. They just revised the deal that he had.
Exactly.
There was 2 years left. There's still 2 years left. If he's on the roster, I think it's on the first day of free agency, he gets $40 million locked in for next year. I don't know if that's going to happen.
That's not happening.
It's kind of a bummer because I've loved this marriage. Like the Stafford, I know Stafford's been banged up. The team has been banged up since 2021. But when those guys are on a heater, him and McVay, it's as fun to watch as any offense in the NFL.
Yeah, it changed his entire legacy these years with the Rams. He would have been talented guy, monster arm, didn't have the right pieces around him. There's a lot of those stories in NFL history, but he was able to get to a different spot and change it here at the end. So we'll see what it looks like here with Stafford.
Actually, has any quarterback changed their reputation of being a winner as effectively as Matthew Stafford has over the last 3
because it was the opposite,
seasons?
right? It was he was the stat guy who never won. I remember the nickname Stat Padford, which, by the way, elite stuff. We don't do that anymore.
Excellent nickname.
Very good.
And I mean, literally one postseason run later, all of that has been washed away.
Yeah.
That it's one of the most impressive, I think, turns in a career arc that you'll see at a quarterback, especially at his age.
At that age, yeah, it doesn't usually happen. All right, let's take a break. We come back. 2 more teams to get to: the Arizona Cardinals and the Seattle Seahawks. All right, we are back on the Ringer NFL show. Third in odds in the NFC West, the Arizona Cardinals, coming off an 8-9 season. They are plus 390 to win the division behind the Rams and the 49ers. They are plus 136 to make the playoffs. Their over-under for wins is 8.5. Their offseason signed Josh Sweat, Calais Campbell, and Dalvin Tomlinson on defense, drafted Walter Nolan, drafted Michigan corner Will Johnson, who fell to the second round because of some injury concerns. So an upgrade in talent on defense. Offensively, they're pretty much running it back here. Ruiz, how do you assess the Arizona Cardinals offseason?
I gave them another B. I'm just giving everyone a B.
It's hard. Yeah. So, you have an A, you have a D, and then most of the other teams fall into the same tier.
Yeah, but I'm very bullish on this team. I'm going to join the hipsters. I think the hipsters were a year
Don't
early.
do it, Ruiz. Don't do it. Come back. Let me pull you back.
No, I just think they were a year early. I'm just saying, sometimes teams come up. It's not just hipster love. They had the best point differential in the division. They scored the most points in the division. You think about all these offensive geniuses: Sean McVay, Kyle Shanahan, Geno Smith, another offensive genius. But they scored the most points. And I think the one issue that I have with the offense is Kyler Murray in the obvious passing situation. Not just Kyler Murray, but the whole offensive line. They got blitzed to hell last year. That was the main strategy for defenses is when we get into obvious passing situations, we're not going to let Kyler Murray scramble around and find openings. We're going to send 6 after him. No escape lanes whatsoever. We got a guy in every gap, and Kyler Murray's just going to have to figure it out. And with that offensive line and with Kyler Murray's height, that was just a recipe for disaster. And I went back and watched all their blitzes on third down earlier this morning, and it was just him kind of chucking up throws off his back foot.
Yes.
And it's hard to blame anyone on the offense. You could blame the offensive line because the interior offensive line in particular was caving in every time. So you understand why Kyler Murray was rushing things. But at the same time, you're a quarterback. You're supposed to stand in there. You're getting paid a lot of money, stand in there and deliver throws, and he wasn't doing it. So I think that's where the offense takes the next step. And I do think that they're trying to make moves to solidify that offensive line. And then on the other side of the ball, they just got to get to third down. They sucked on first down. They could have stopped the run. They could have stopped the pass. And I think building up the defensive line like they did, they brought in a couple of veterans. I think that was the smart move. So I could see this team taking a step on both sides.
Diante, what do you think? How do you assess their offseason?
To me, this is like as solid a C as it can get to me. I look at this team and I'm like, this is like the Brick Johnson All-Stars. Like, these are a bunch of names in Madden that will be between like 77
That's a column right there. You're going to be asked to write in August.
You know, like they'd all be between like 77 and 83 overall, and you can make them look much better than they actually are when you have them as like your user-controlled player. But I'm just like wholly unmoved, I think, with how I conceptualize this team. This looks like a 9-8 football team, and whether or not they get to 9-8 or if they're 6-11 and 7-10 is going to be based on whether or not Kyler Murray can be the ceiling raiser that he is at his best. And you look at their schedule, and I think a lot of preconceived notions about Kyler Murray, whether it's optimistic or otherwise, are definitely built to be confirmed. And I think we'll get to that when we talk about the predictions. But the wide receiver depth is a little bit better. I do think that Zay Jones helps. I think that having Trey McBride as your yak guy underneath helps as well. I think that Marvin Harrison Jr.'s usage will continue to improve on a year-to-year basis because that is a profile of receiver that Kyler Murray's never had before. And I do think that there were just some misses in the way that they were operating that offense that will get ironed out over time. And then defensively, Steven said it, like they needed to address the interior of the defensive line because all the cool creative stuff they do on second and obvious and third and obvious, they don't get to access often enough because they get their asses kicked on first down. And I think that you brought in the right kind of big bodies to be able to address that. And then ultimately their ceiling as a pass defense is going to be banked upon whether or not Will Johnson has number one corner potential. Even if it's high number two, I think that will be a win for them based on where they drafted him late in the second round. But I think if he shows anything like what he was at his best at Michigan, you're going to be feeling really, really bullish, I think, about the Cardinals being a potential sleeper in the NFC.
That was honestly like the perfect landing spot for a player like him. Like the Cardinals don't want to play man coverage. And when they play man coverage, they're blitzing everybody. That's the only time they play man coverage is when they're calling coverage here, which they did a lot. They did it at the third highest rate on third down last year. But just returning to the point, like they were an 8-9 team last year, but there were some close calls against very good teams. They lost by 6 to Buffalo, 7 to Detroit, 1 to Minnesota, and 4 to the Rams. If
that
they
Vikings
win those
game.
Coins, they win those.
They make the right analytical call there. I remember us talking about it. They kick the field goal, go up from 3 to 6. So you're right. It could be a different conversation.
I mean, imagine how we're talking. If they get like the luck, I'm thinking of like a lucky team recently, like the 2023 Vikings, where they were winning every close game. If they had that type of close game luck and they win these games, they beat Buffalo and Detroit and Minnesota, and they finish 12-5. Like, how are we talking about this team right now?
It's true. That's fair. That's fair. I give them a B-. I think that they obviously realize that our defensive talent kind of stinks and we need to upgrade. I don't think it went exactly how they might have hoped it would have gone, but you don't always get all the players you want to get there. And so I'm with you, Diante. I looked at it. I'm like, Josh Sweat before the playoffs, the conversations around Josh Sweat were very different than the conversations around Josh Sweat after the Super Bowl. Like he did not have a fantastic season overall. So I think he'll be an upgrade and solid. I don't think he's going to be someone that offenses have to game plan for. How are we going to block him? Calais Campbell and Dalvin Tomlinson. These are older vets.
Guys.
I have no issue signing some older vets, but I also don't know that they're going to make a huge difference. The rookie class here is also very important, just like we kind of talked about with the Niners. I mean, Nolan and Will Johnson, I think, are both high ceiling players where if one of them looks like, man, they look like they can contribute right away, then maybe you have something. But I still look at I look at that Cardinals defensive depth chart and I'm still like, it needs another offseason of work. It's not at a place where I'm like, this is going to be a very good defense again this year. To your guys' point, I mean, they finished 31st in defensive success rate. So just early downs, they could not get stops when they needed to. They could not put themselves in advantageous situations. So I gave them a B- there.
I think this is the exact kind of team that either needs to have an elite offensive line or an A+ playmaker on the perimeter, and they have neither. And that to me, I think is the biggest hang up. If they had an AJ Brown on this team, I would feel very different about them. If they had, it doesn't have to be Detroit, right? It doesn't have to be at the level of Detroit's offensive line. But if they had an A, B+, A- offensive line, I would feel much differently about this offensive ceiling. I'm just so hung up waiting on Marvin Harrison Jr. to turn into something and the interior of this offensive line to be as good as their investment over the last couple of years has suggested they expect it to be.
Yeah, the interior offensive line, I think, is the key for them. Like, that's the difference between what they were last year, which was like hovering around a top 10 offense, and them being a top 5 offense. I honestly think that's on the table this year, especially if Marvin Harrison Jr. takes a step. I didn't like his film last year. I'm kind of lower on him than I was before he came into the league. But if he does take a next step and the offensive line is just fine or solid compared to what it was last year, this could be a top 5 offense to me. Like it almost was. Like the bones are there. They have a quarterback who is good. They have a offensive coordinator who seems to have like he did it 2 years in a row for me now. Like I think Drew Petzing, compared to like the other guys the other young offensive coordinators who kind of burst onto the scene in 2023, he's the one that really like carried it over to 2024 and improved upon what they did. So I'm interested to see what this looks like this year. But I think the offense, no matter what, is going to be good.
So you were saying better than last year, I assume. Better or worse than last year?
Yes, better than last year.
Okay. All right. Diante, what do you got? Better or worse than last year?
I think better. I think if there's a year where Kyler Murray is healthy for the entire stretch of the season and really shows down the stretch that he's the kind of quarterback that I know he can be at his best, I think that this team can be a double-digit win team. They can be a top 8 offense in the NFL. And I trust what they're doing defensively to be able to hold from a year-to-year basis. Because I don't think that while they do a lot of creative stuff, the stuff that I watch that I like of them is all stuff you can replicate. A lot of it is just mixing up looks.
I understand how you talk yourself into them. I've got them marginally better, but mostly the same. 8 and 9 feels right about the place where I would have them for this year. You know, that was with Kyler Murray starting all 17 games. Last year with Murray, they're 36-45-1. They've never had a top 10 offense by DVOA. I know they've been close. You're right. They were very close last year and another year as well, but never been in the top 10 by DVOA with him as the starter. And they've made the playoffs once in 6 seasons with him there. So is this the year that the narrative shifts, that some of the pieces around him maybe are a little bit better, that the defense is a little bit better? We shall see. They were banged up last year. I will be fair about it. They got hit hard with injuries, specifically on defense. They had 7 different O-line combinations play at least 50 snaps. And to Ruiz's point, they were 3-5 in 1-score games. If that's 5-3, and all of a sudden a couple of those wins are against very good teams, then maybe we're having a different conversation about the Arizona Cardinals. All right, way too early prediction. I'm excited. Let's start with Ruiz. I'm excited. What is this going to be with how he's been talking about these Arizona Cardinals?
Emphasis on way too early, because I'm definitely going to change this by August. They win the division. That's my prediction. They're the NFC West champs. I think the offense, I think they attacked the problems that they had last year with the run defense on the defensive side. I think we see a better offensive line, and we see a scheme that protects Kyler Murray from his physical limitations, i.e. he's very short. And that's what defenses preyed upon last year. If you take that out, if you take away the blitzes and then the third down and the pocket caving in, he was one of the better quarterbacks and one of the more efficient quarterbacks in the NFL. If they could just just deter defenses from blitzing the hell out of them, I think this is a top 5 offense next year.
Diante, what do you got?
So to me, I have them making the playoffs, but it is going to look exactly like how it did in 2021. You look at their schedule, and I want to say 8 of maybe the first 9 games are either at home or indoors. So early in the season, when they always look good, they're going to be playing in front of a home crowd or they'll be in a dome. I think that they're going to run it up offensively. And then you look after that Cowboys game, and they've got to see, you've got to see the Rams twice. You've got to see the Texans. You've got to see the Bengals. It's Texans, Falcons, Bengals, Rams in December, basically, to close out the season. That to me feels very much like, oh, this team got in at 10-7, but they were 10-3 going into the last month of the season and went 0-4 and limped their way in and ultimately losing a wild card round. But I do think that this offense is going to put up some really impressive numbers. Their schedule, similar to the 49ers, obviously another division mate, is very much tailored, I think, for them to put up big numbers on the offensive end.
All right. My way. We're not on the same side with the Niners. We're not on the same side with the Cardinals. My prediction is there will be a point in the first 10 weeks where everyone is convinced they're going to win the division and that Kyler Murray is discussed as an MVP candidate, and then they won't be in the playoffs when all's said and done. 8 or 9 wins, not in the playoffs. Once again, putting on my hater hat here for the Arizona Cardinals.
We haven't had Grumpy Sheil in a little while. I like this.
Last team, the Seattle Seahawks. Last in division odds. Who would have thought it? Plus 550 to win the division, plus 186 to make the playoffs. To put that into perspective, the only teams in the NFC with worse odds to make the playoffs the Cowboys, Panthers, Saints, and Giants. That's it. Over under for wins for the Seahawks is 7.5. I feel like I have given my opinion on the Seahawks offseason many a time on this podcast in the previous months, but let's put a grade on it. Diante, what do you got?
So for me, I'm giving them a C+, and it's fun. I feel totally different about what they did on both sides of the ball. If we were only grading offensive moves and defensive moves, I think that we would see the delta, because I really don't like where they're situated offensively. But I love bringing in DeMarcus Lawrence to see if you can get something out of him for 1 year. Obviously, Mike McDonald going back to Baltimore, you have a long history now of them being able to maximize veteran, aging guys, being able to get something else out of them for 1 or 2 more years. I do trust that they'll be able to do so. And we have last year's evidence of Leonard Williams being healthy all year and being a big-time contributor for them defensively as well. I think that he can get the most out of Nick Emmanwori. We don't have to set the ceiling at Kyle Hamilton, even though you see versatile skill set with Nick Emmanwori. I do think you can get him in the slot. You can play him deep if you need to. There's a lot of different ways that you can use him productively, and I expect that they'll do so. And yeah, the only reason why this is not a B- or better is Sam Darnold, obviously brought in as a quarterback. You have Cooper Kupp, who just does not look like he has the same juice that he did 2-3 years ago in his career. And Marquez Valdes-Scantling now is your outside field stretcher guy, who's nice to have for a post route every once in a while, but is not going to be consistent enough, I think, to be able to help raise the level of play around Sam Darnold. And this offensive line has just been very disappointing over the last 2 or so seasons with Geno Smith, who's great against the blitz and great against pressure. And now you're dropping a quarterback that is the complete opposite in those situations behind that offensive line of Sam Darnold. I just do not have a whole lot of optimism for what it's going to look like on that side of the ball.
C+ from Diante. Ruiz, what do you got?
I'm going D+. I think this is like this. Just looking at the offense, because I agree, like the defensive moves, they all make sense to me on paper. DeMarcus Lawrence, I think he's going to have a good year. Re-signing Ernest Jones made sense with what he was after he came over. I think the defense is going to be better than it was last year. I still think it has room to grow. It's the best third down defense in the NFL, but on the early downs, it wasn't very good. And I think with these moves, especially like on the defensive line, you have Ernest Jones for a full year, that you're going to see a better first and second down defense, which is going to make their third down defense even scarier.
Even better, right?
But offensively, like they're the only team in the NFL that lost a top 10 quarterback, in my opinion. And that's what I think Geno Smith is. And like Diante said, you're replacing him with like the antithesis of what they needed, given their offensive line situation and what their problems were on offense last year. Now, the saving grace could be the offensive coordinator change, going from Ryan Grubb to Clint Kubiak. By the way, this is a 2 Kubiak offensive coordinator division. I didn't realize that. The 49ers have a Kubiak, and Seattle now has a Kubiak.
That's right. I look at it. They had a mediocre offense last year, and they replaced Geno Smith with Sam Darnold. They replaced DK Metcalf with Cooper Kupp. They replaced Ryan Grubb with Clint Kubiak, and they add one offensive lineman who is a rookie in Gray Zabel. So that does not inspire me. As I've mentioned before, I'm giving them a C-. I like what they did on defense too. I think the defense can be pretty good. I'll be honest. I looked at this roster and I was like, if they had Geno Smith and DK Metcalf, I wonder what my prediction would be for this team, Mike McDonald, in year 2, maybe with an offensive coordinator who I felt like had a stronger track record than Clint Kubiak. But the reason I didn't go lower is because I don't like the plan, but I do understand what they were potentially trying to do here. I don't agree with it. I don't agree with their assessments or their evaluations. And I don't think the downside is that low, because I think if they have a bad season, it's like they're going to, be back to the drawing board at quarterback, but they're really only locked into Darnold for 1 season when you look at kind of the guarantees there. So it comes down to, I don't buy that Darnold is going to be the same guy he was in Minnesota. And I don't buy that Clint Kubiak is like some kind of offensive savant who can coach around O-line deficiencies. And it's going to look totally different this year. Maybe I'll be wrong on one or both of those counts, but that's how I feel.
I mean, we literally have a bunch of tape of that from last year, and it did not look great.
That's what I'm saying.
New Orleans' offensive line was healthy.
People keep telling me, Diante. I don't know.
Like you have literally dropped him into the exact same circumstances that made that offense look bad. An offensive line that is often injured and bad up the middle, and a wide receiver core that cannot, that does not separate very often in the intermediate or vertical plane. And that's exactly what they were dealing with for basically the last 14 weeks of the season after Chris Olave, Rashid Shaheed, and Eric McCoy and all those guys got hurt in New Orleans. I don't know why I would believe it would look any different with Sam Darnold under center than it did with Derek Carr and Spencer Rattler last year. I don't see it.
I'm with you. All right. Better or worse than last year? I can start. Should be pretty obvious. I think they're worse. They went 10-7 last year, just missed out on the playoffs. They were 18th in offensive DVOA, 10th in defensive DVOA. They were 6-2 in one-score games. And again, this really just comes down to, I think the offense is going to be worse. I actually think the offense specifically has quite a low floor, where if you get bad Darnold combined with bad offensive line, if Jackson Smith and Jigba misses 6 weeks or something, like this being one of the worst 5 or 6 offenses in the NFL, in my opinion, is in play this season. So I am bullish on the defense. I think that probably sets the floor a little bit higher in terms of the team's record. But I think overall, this is a worse team. I would be surprised if this team made the playoffs this year. Diante, what do you got?
If this roster held exactly, I might make the argument that they're worse because their performance down the second half of the season last year was banked on a lot of high variance stuff, like their third down defense, which Steven mentioned, forcing a bunch of turnovers. They swept the Cardinals last year because of turnovers and third down defense, not because their offense was great. And they didn't play their best against their top competition, right? Like this was very much can beat bad teams.
Yes.
Will kind of struggle on offense against good teams. We definitely saw that as they were trying to make a push for the postseason. And now all the pieces that I thought gave them a higher ceiling are out of the building outside of Mike McDonald. That's the one guy who I think could be a ceiling raiser for this team. And he doesn't get to put on the pads at all. I don't know how this team is not the worst in the NFC West. Just look, even if you're banking on the absolute best outcome for Sam Darnold, I don't think that there's enough around him for them to be a double-digit win team again.
Ruiz?
Yeah, I think they're definitely worse. They went 6-2 in close games last year, which kind of, inflated that 10-7 record. And I totally agree with you with the offense. I feel like this is a very low floor offense. And what I'm envisioning is kind of like a Jets team. Like pick any Jets team from like the last decade. Strong defense, questionable offense that kind of sets back the defense and makes things harder. And I think that's the type of season they're going to have. 7-8 wins. We're going to talk about Mike McDonald being a genius, but we're going to, commiserate about the offensive line and the quarterback situation. By the way, I just found this out today. Seattle's defensive coordinator has a British accent.
Or something else.
Their defensive coordinator has a British accent, which
shouldn't
matter, but kind of does matter.
Yeah,
Not
he was
only
on
that,
one of the hard knocks,
safe home,
right, with the Cowboys.
Safe haven for nepotism hires. You got the Kubiak here. You've got a Harbaugh here on the staff.
This is a division as a whole. Look at the Rams. The Rams. It's a whole nepo coaching staff.
If there's any place with plenty of options that are safe havens for nepotism, the NFL. We could do a top 15, a top 32 maybe. Even we would be able to do in the NFL. All right. My way too early prediction. I'll end on a positive note for you, Seahawks fans. They have a top 3 defense. Byron Murphy in year 2, next to Leonard Williams. I like the DeMarcus Lawrence signing. If nothing else, he gives you a stout run defender. I like Emin Worry as a fun wild card. I kind of give McDonald the benefit of the doubt. And then to your guys' point, that was the first season under Mike McDonald. Now year 2 with a lot of the same pieces, I think has a chance to be really exciting. So not bullish on the team, but I feel like they can have one of the best defenses in the NFL, even though I got some questions at corner and some questions at various spots on the depth chart. I think they can figure it out. Diante, what do you have? What's your way too early prediction?
I think that by the time they see the Vikings on November 30th, we're getting We Want Milroe chants.
I like that.
This
November
is a one
30th,
and done year.
Okay.
I think this is a one and done year for Sam Darnold in Seattle. And I think that they're going to end up giving their backup quarterbacks a shot. I can just envision this being a disaster passing game for Seattle. And you look at their schedule early in the year, they do not have the kind of breaks that San Francisco or Arizona have. They're going to see some pretty good teams. They're going to be on the road quite a bit as well against good teams early in the season. They could be out of contention pretty early in this thing.
All right. One and done for Darnold. Ruiz, what do you got?
Sort of along the same lines. I'm going Drew Lock starts a game that's not due to injury. I don't know. I don't think it's Milroe. I think Milroe maybe next year you start to hear those chants, but I'm going Drew Lock. Maybe Milroe gets like a like a showcase game at the end of the year.
Oh, he'll get one of
The
those
Joe
Taysom
Milton type
Hill
game. Yeah.
fake production games where you throw 6 passes, but 2 of them go for like 40 yards, you know? Get a 30-yard run. Everybody feels good. You could drop them on your fantasy team late in the season just in case you need a flex guy.
The Joe
That's
Milton
right.
game last year.
Yeah. With the running ability, yeah, who knows? That might be a good ad there. I like it. Diante's already getting the fantasy big board in order. All right, so that's kind of a depressing end. Sorry, Seahawks fans, that Ruiz is predicting Drew Lock starts not because of injury, and Diante is predicting we want Milroe chance before you even get into December. We've been wrong before. Maybe we'll be wrong again, but I think we're on the same page with how we view this Seahawks offense in 2025. All right. That'll wrap it up. The NFC West, an action, a fun division. I would say of all the ones we've done so far or will do, these teams have some variance. We have some disagreements on a couple of these teams. Could really go either way. So these will be some interesting teams to talk about in the months ahead. All right. Thanks to Diante Lee. Thank you to Stephen Ruiz. Thanks to Christopher Sutton for producing and Kiera Givens on social. I'm Sheil Kapadia. We'll be back next week with another division preview on the Ringer NFL Show. Must be 21 plus and present in select states. For Kansas, in affiliation with Kansas Star Casino, or 18 plus and present in DC. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit rg-help.com. Call 1-888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org/chat in Connecticut or visit mdgamblinghelp.org in Maryland. Hope is here. Visit gamblinghelplinema.org or call 800-327-5050 for 24/7 support in Massachusetts or call 1-877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY in New York.